Hi, I'm Thomas. Welcome back to Pilot's Workshop. After building the top frame and the leg assembly of our workbench, we will continue working on the leg assembly. In this episode, we will install the heavy-duty adjustable feet and all parts of the retractable wheel system, consisting of the supporting beam, 2 hinges, the board that the wheels will be mounted to from underneath, a lever with a shaft and this eccentric, and the 2 blocks that hold the shaft in place. The eccentric is the part that actually pushes down the wheels and therefore lifts the workbench. It is connected to the large lever by the shaft and can easily be explained. In the position you see the lever now, the narrow side of the eccentric faces down, not touching the wheel board. So the wheels rest on the ground, not lifting the bench. When the lever is moved over to the right side, however, the eccentric gradually pushes down the wheel board until it reaches the dead center, after which it gently drops onto a stop surface, thus making sure that the wheels stay down securely. A different method of this can be seen on my planer, where the securing happens with a spring-loaded hook. This works perfectly for the 75 kg of that machine, but the finished and loaded workbench will be anything between 200 and 300 kg, and so the mechanics have to be more sturdy. But before we can install anything, we first have to make it. I began by making the boards that the wheels will be mounted to. So let's get started. At this point, a quick disclaimer. While making the wheel mechanism, I was learning on the job, tiptoeing my way along, so I made small mistakes that I will point out so that you can avoid them should you attempt to build this mechanism yourself. None of these mistakes influence the functionality, they are more annoying than anything else. After cutting and planing the stock, the roundover at the contact point could be made. I marked a rough area in the middle and made a large radius with chisel, belt sander and sandpaper. And there's my first mistake. I didn't notice the knob and it was a pain to work around it with a chisel. After some fine sanding and a layer of linseed oil, the piece was ready for the next step. Screw holes were marked and drilled and the wheels mounted. Next came a test fit, to see what the exact position of the wheel board would be when I noticed that the large brakes of the wheels would touch the leg beam, which is mistake number 2. I came to the conclusion that the brakes would be inaccessible anyways, so I cut them off. And nobody will ever know. Then the position of the wheel board got adjusted and hinges could be placed, marked and screw holes drilled. I like to pre-drill larger holes with a 3mm drill. A self-made super long one comes in very handy when working with large timber and difficult places. To sink the washers on the bottom, I turned the assembly around and drilled down with a Forstner bit. And now my third mistake becomes visible. The large gap between wheel board and leg moved the holes of the hinges close to the edge, so I ended up with these open countersink holes. And then the hole can be drilled through with the right size drill bit. I use machine screws because I want the strength of a nut and washer from the other side. Then the same was done on the other side of the hinges, but there I let the screws come out on the other side. Then I cut off the long ends of the screws that were sticking out on the bottom and continued with the hardwood parts of the mechanism. I used glued up boards that are very cheap to buy and laminated them for the thickness I needed. After putting some weights on the glue up, I used clamps to keep the boards from gliding sideways on one another. Then it was time to glue on my shapes. Before cutting them out, the holes for the 35mm dowels were drilled. I again first pre-drilled with a 3mm drill, followed by the large Forstner bit. The best thing is to drill almost all the way through, then turn the piece around and drill the last few millimeters from the other side. This way there will be no tear out, and the 3mm pre-drilled hole works as a perfect guide for the Forstner bit. Then everything could be cut out. A thin blade on the bandsaw makes this into a quick step. The handles I quickly rounded over. Next up, the blocks. These pieces carry all the weight of the workbench and therefore have to be anchored with heavy bolts. I used carriage bolts so that they can be loosened and tightened with one hand. After drilling, the top of the holes had to be squared up in order to receive the adjacent part of the screws. A sharp chisel takes care of that. For transferring the holes onto the workbench, the blocks can be placed and the holes copied, either using the same drill or a pencil. The holes are then drilled as before. Now the support beam can be positioned and fixed into place. I'm not the biggest fan of wood screws, but here they don't carry any load and only keep the piece in place. Now the other block can be placed, holes marked and drilled. Mistake number 4 becomes apparent. The crossmember doesn't allow the block to go further onto the support beam and should be a bit further away. After this step, the blocks could be finalized by cutting them in half, taking off the paper shapes and fine sanding them, along with the other pieces. Next, the blocks can be mounted. Large washers make sure that the soft wood can take in all the forces. After loosely fitting the feet, the assembly can be turned around one last time. Now follows the final part of this assembly. The nuts holding the blocks get loosened up a bit, so they have some play. The dowel is inserted and the bottom parts of the blocks that don't carry any load get fixed in place with wood screws. The next part to be installed is the eccentric. It gets slid to a position over the roundover and turned to the wheels down stop position. While pressing the wheel board and the eccentric onto one another, a pilot hole for a wooden pin gets drilled, far enough to go all the way through the dowel, but not so far that it comes back out on the other side of the eccentric. The pin gets hammered in with some glue and cut off. This repeats for the handle. And the mechanism already works. At last, the dowel has to be cut off, and the ends of the pins sanded flush. And that's it for this episode. The workbench has its wheels. Next time, we unite the top frame and leg assembly. So see you in the next video. This is Pilot's Workshop. Thank you for watching.